Silence is golden, but is it just the quiet before the storm? As Netanyahu meets with Trump, we had headlines versus realities. And this week, we had a perfect case study. The biggest stories often generate endless headlines and incessant, breathless coverage. They demand constant updates, new angles, and fresh drama. All this comes at the expense of the truth, and therefore is usually shallow, lacking background depth, and almost no extended context that allows us to understand what is really going on. And that's where we come in. We'll go behind the headlines and give you the full picture. The leading story this week was obviously Netanyahu's hurried impromptu visit with President Trump in Washington. The deafening silence that emanated from the White House Oval Office after the meeting was in stark contrast to the noise created by the media before, with its usual wave of speculation around the visit. Well, they have airtime to fill after all, and when facts are scarce, imagination becomes a convenient substitute. The weight of the post-meeting silence was evident in a conversation I had Thursday morning with Israel's leading political analyst, Galei Israel's senior correspondent Yaakov Berdugo, who was with the delegation in Washington, and he summarized the visit as follows, and I quote, "The Prime Minister presented something that, in his view, explains the unusual quiet that followed. It reflects a great deal of what happened inside the room. I believe," he said, "that the meeting was dramatic. It introduced a new approach and new thinking to the Americans. The data that Netanyahu presented to President Trump will help him make a better decision. It also places Israel in a position where it is clearly saying, we will defend ourselves, and that matters. And if necessary, we will have to act even if it means moving forward on our own." He said that what he got from this is that we respect the Americans, we wanted support, but we will not again allow an existential threat to develop before our eyes, especially not after October 7th. Berdugo continues saying that Israel has strong interests, but so do the Qataris and the Saudis. He said that I also think Israel, and Netanyahu in particular, do not want to be seen as pushing America into a war, especially when you consider the isolationist movement among the Republican Party members. No briefing and no press conference can replace silence. Silence is a very important part of negotiations. I'm not sure, he added, that Prime Minister won't have to return to the United States once more, but the sequence of his conversations with President Trump will intensify in the coming days from what he understands. So after Netanyahu announced the surprise trip to meet with Trump, the media here in Israel were fed headlines by opposition figures insisting that the trip was unnecessary, a bluff, as one politician put it, driven by politics rather than by the necessity of substance. One member of Knesset claimed that Netanyahu is bugging Trump and he is no longer relevant. And then came the truly absurd. A former boneheaded soccer player turned political commentator claimed on air that Netanyahu actually flew to Washington simply to bring his wife back to Israel because he said there's no evidence that she's even in Israel. He hadn't seen her. Did anybody else? This is what happens when commentary replaces reporting and gossip replaces analysis. What we can definitely determine is that Netanyahu decided on the urgent trip to go to Washington out of concern that Israel must clarify its position regarding Iran. The Prime Minister last week concluded that speaking through intermediaries was no longer sufficient, and that a direct personal conversation with President Trump was required. This, especially after the American president spoke of excellent talks that they had with Tehran, which immediately raised a red flag in Jerusalem. And this is not mere speculation. Before boarding the plane to Washington, Netanyahu was very direct in a statement he made. In his own words, he said Israel needed to clarify its position on a possible agreement with Iran, and it needed to do so face to face. Netanyahu himself put it plainly, and you can see here at the interview he gave at the airport.
בנסיעה הזאת אנחנו נדון בשורה של נושאים, עזה, האזור, אבל כמובן בראש ובראשונה במשא ומתן עם איראן. אני אציג בפני הנשיא את התפיסות שלנו לגבי העקרונות במשא ומתן, העקרונות החשובים. ובעיניי הם עקרונות חשובים לא רק לישראל, אלא לכל מי שבעולם רוצה שלום וביטחון במזרח התיכון.
This is very important indeed. But the truth is that no world leader can just pick up the phone and coordinate an immediate meeting with the President of the United States, regardless of the urgency of the matter or because of a special friendship that these two leaders obviously share. There is much more to this and to what we are actually seeing. Keep in mind that Netanyahu flew to Washington with his military attaché and who is going to be the next head of Mossad, and after he held meetings with the IDF Chief of Staff, the head of military intelligence, and the commander of the Israel Air Force. This is meaningful, as you'll see in a moment. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15th through the 17th at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Register today at jnssummit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV, that is JNSTV, one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem. And as I promised, there is more going on. First, the meeting is part of the international strategic realignment Trump is constructing and which I have discussed in previous podcasts. Netanyahu in Washington also declared that Israel is joining Trump's Peace Council. Second, Netanyahu's visit ties in specifically with the changes to the U.S. security policy as detailed in the United States National Security Strategy document that was published in November 2025. The National Security Strategy document lays out the U.S. foreign policy principles, priorities, and focus on global regions. It details proposed uses of all facets of U.S. power needed to achieve American security goals, international interests, commitments, objectives, and policies, along with defense capabilities necessary to deter threats and implement U.S. security plans. And here is the relevance for understanding the real meaning for why President accepted meeting with Netanyahu on such short notice. The 2025 U.S. National Security Document lays out a vision in which Israel is more than just an American ally. It is a central pillar of American strategy. The document highlights the destruction of Iran's nuclear program in Operation Midnight Hammer, the military operation conducted by the United States on June 22, 2025, targeting 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, and frames this along with the decisive U.S. support of Israel during the 12-day war with Iran, as historic strategic achievements. Israel is described in the document as a model ally, the example Washington wants other partners to emulate. It notes Israel's military achievements over the past year against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. It openly criticizes the previous administration for restricting Israel's freedom of action and clarifies the new policy, which is to empower Israel, not to restrain it. A strong Israel is a top American strategic interest, not as a partner it needs to protect, but as a regional anchor of U.S. interests. It positions Israel as the central stabilizing force in the Middle East, a strategic U.S. asset. The old Middle East, the one built on balancing militias, appeasing Iran, and restraining Israel, is collapsing. A new one is emerging, built on the opposite logic: empower Israel, weaken Iran, integrate the region. So Netanyahu going to the United States is coordination at the highest level. It's the United States and Israel shaping the next phase of the Middle East together. Trump is deliberately vague on his intentions. The delay is not hesitation, but a calculated move to gather more and more forces in order to deliver a short, lethal, and decisive strike. There is another element here. Trump is also speaking to the non-interventionists, the American first isolationists on the American right. He understands that if he does decide to take action, he needs total support among the Republicans. Prime Minister Netanyahu brought to the meeting with Trump what Israel has to offer at its finest: information, intelligence evaluations, and possible tactical recommendations drawn from real operational experience, all that it wants to place directly on the president's desk for his consideration. The region at the same time is witnessing immense change, all of which is secondary to the removal of Iran. Entrepreneur Michael Eisenberg joined Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip in a late decision by Netanyahu to raise the issue of Gaza during the meeting. Eisenberg is part of the Israeli steering committee dealing with Gaza, and he initiated the establishment of the Gaza Relief Fund, which operated to distribute food in Gaza during the final months of the war, an activity that sparked significant anger within Hamas. Gaza will be run by foreign elements who are organizing as we speak, but not before Hamas is disarmed and removed. Lebanon is staging a performance of unity because it knows that the donors for its restoration won't tolerate Hezbollah's dominance anymore. Hezbollah is weakened and internally fractured, incapable of even responding to Israel as the organization attempts at rearming. Gulf states are deepening security ties with Israel, while on the other end, Saudi Arabia is not pleased with the growing international standing of Israel, as I assume the Europeans are. And Turkey is worried the change in Iran will bring a flood of Kurdish refugees into its territory, igniting a population shift it will not be able to handle. The countries in the region are concerned about the Iranian response and what it will be and how fatal it will be. Israel this week announced, while Netanyahu was in Washington, that it has made significant improvement, strategic changes to its missile defense system since last June, when we intercepted 91% of the 550 missiles Iran launched at Israel. But as former cabinet minister and now the director of Rafael Defense Industries, Dr. Yuval Steinitz said, he'd rather we faced 50 Iranian missiles hitting our country than a single Iranian nuclear bomb. That puts what we are dealing with in the most profound way. And now to other connected matters. I'll start with Lebanon. Just this week, Senator Lindsey Graham abruptly ended a meeting with Lebanon's chief of defense after the general refused to acknowledge Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. This raised the concern of the Lebanese state's inability or unwillingness to rein in Hezbollah, and that the Lebanese armed forces are deconflicting with Hezbollah instead of confronting it. Inside Lebanon itself, though, there is evidence of a shift taking place. Gilad Katz, advisor to Israel's foreign minister and the former Israeli consul general to Houston this week, wrote about an unprecedented event taking place inside Hezbollah. For the first time since the organization was founded in 1982, a top Hezbollah official has resigned, or more accurately, has been pushed out. Wafik Safa is considered one of the closest people to Hezbollah's former Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who we eliminated about a year and a half ago. His role was essentially to coordinate and liaise between Hezbollah and various organizations and entities that work with it. Such a resignation, Katz explains, is further evidence of the deep crisis Hezbollah is in. And it's not happening in a vacuum. At the very same time, the Lebanese prime minister toured southern Lebanon, something that in the past could not have taken place without Hezbollah's approval. And now, no one is asking Hezbollah for its permission. According to Katz, Hezbollah is under pressure from every direction, from Israeli strikes, from the Lebanese public, from the Lebanese government, and from the Americans. And the more time passes, the clearer it becomes that the operations Israel carried out, including the elimination of Nasrallah, fundamentally changed Hezbollah's ability to function. From a strong, large, intimidating organization, Hezbollah is now weak and unable to recover. Katz stresses that Israel must continue its zero-tolerance policy toward Hezbollah, thwart every attempt at reorganization or recovery, strike as many operatives planning attacks as possible, and signaling to Lebanon that dismantling Hezbollah is the only solution for their country. No one, he adds, would have believed such a situation possible or realistic just 2 years ago. Therefore, anyone claiming that a terror organization cannot be defeated militarily should be reminded of what we did to Hezbollah, because this is what a clear military victory looks like. I want to focus for a moment on the event Katz mentions in his article, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's 2-day tour of southern Lebanon deep inside Hezbollah-controlled territory. He went to the town of Kile, one of Hezbollah's most entrenched strongholds, and was greeted with Hezbollah flags waving above him. The last time Salam visited Kile a few months ago, residents cursed him. He was seen as an anti-Hezbollah, a man who openly said the group must disarm. This time, he was welcomed during his visit. Why the change of attitude? Because South Lebanon is devastated. Entire neighborhoods that served as Hezbollah military bases are in total rubble. The only way to rebuild is with foreign money, money that will not flow if Lebanon looks like a failed state run by a militia. So unsurprisingly, the United States announced a new package of sanctions targeting the terrorist organization Hezbollah. Under the measures, any American transaction with listed companies that assisted the organization will be blocked. Next month, France is hosting a major donor conference with Gulf states and European governments under the banner of reconstruction of war-damaged areas in Lebanon. These donor countries are not sympathetic to Hezbollah. Kuwait, for example, announced this week that it is adding 8 hospitals in Lebanon to the national terrorist list. This designation will prohibit any funding of these hospitals from any source originating in Kuwait. This is a significant blow to Lebanon, as Kuwait has been long providing substantial support for Lebanon's local healthcare system. Qatari media reported that the Kuwaiti government committee established to support the fight against terrorism has decided to include the 8 Lebanese hospitals on the national terror list, classifying them as entities for which there is reasonable grounds to believe they have carried out or attempted to carry out acts of terrorism. Hospitals used by terrorists? No, can't be. No way. Interesting point is that the committee's mandate specifies that an addition to the national terror list is either by its own initiative or based on a request from a foreign authority. Makes you think. In Lebanon, officials claim that the hospitals in question are affiliated with Hezbollah or with organizations close to it. The Kuwaiti committee demanded the implementation of its decision, which includes freezing all funds and economic assets belonging directly or indirectly to the entities on the list. The regulations also require Kuwaiti institutions executing the freeze to report back to the committee within 24 hours on the steps taken. So Lebanon and Hezbollah are staging a performance, a temporary, fragile facade of cooperation to convince the world that Lebanese state is in control. And that's why Safa was pushed out. He was too provocative, too visible, and openly thuggish. His motorcycle gangs terrorized Christian neighborhoods whenever Hezbollah wanted to send a message to the Lebanese government. That behavior is now a liability. Hezbollah is trying to soften its image, to look governable, to avoid scaring off the donors. But everyone in Lebanon knows the truth. The smiles are for the cameras. The unity is fake. And beneath the surface, the country is bracing for the next phase, because the old balance of power has been shattered. Which brings us back to the core point. Israel's actions over the past 2 years did more than just weaken Hezbollah militarily. Israel disrupted the entire political ecosystem that allowed Hezbollah to operate with impunity. From Beirut to the villages of South Lebanon to Kuwait, the ripple effects are clear, and the Middle East is clearly shifting. And for the first time in decades, Hezbollah is the one that is on the defensive. Lebanon is obligated to disarm Hezbollah. It is one of the requirements of the ceasefire which they were to fulfill by the end of 2025. It is another of the open-ended circumstances and Arab deception that Israel will deal with. Understanding the Middle East is sometimes as simple as a cup of coffee. That, at least, is what Middle East expert Idit Bar suggests while looking at how Qatar manages to play both sides of the regional field, funding Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood on one hand, while hosting the largest U.S. Air Force base in the Middle East on the other. Idit posted that right now Doha is showcasing a lavish exhibition on the history of coffee, ancient pots, curated displays about values of hospitality, and European researchers praising Arab heritage. On the surface, it's all culture, refinement, and soft lighting. But as Bar points out, this is precisely the point. According to her, Qatar invests billions in museums, exhibitions, and global events like the World Cup to craft an image of an enlightened, cultured state preserving Arab tradition. It's a soft power strategy designed to shape global perception. Visitors fly in, sip coffee with beautifully staged gallery, and leave, repeating the narrative Qatar wants them to carry. But Bar stresses the contrast. Behind this polished pretense is the same state which is funding the ideological movements that destabilize the region and providing shelter to the very actors responsible for violence across the Middle East. Qatar, she says, has mastered this playbook, and elements of it are now appearing inside Western political systems themselves. This pattern that Idit Bar describes, a cultural veneer masking a far more radical agenda, mirrors what we are now seeing with certain political figures in the West who speak the language of inclusion and heritage while advancing deeper ideological projects that most people don't recognize. Nowhere is there a better example of how public attention can be completely misdirected by Islam than the Caliphate of New York City. During a press conference this week about early childhood programs, Mayor Mamdani's remarks about immigration and Islam framed the long-term cultural trajectory of the city shaped by Islamic identity and expansion.
And I consider my own faith, Islam, a religion built upon a narrative of migration. The story of the Hijrah reminds us that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a stranger too, who fled Mecca and was welcomed in Medina. Surah An-Nahl 1642 tells us, "As for those who immigrated in the cause of Allah after being persecuted, we will surely bless them with a good home in this world." Or as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Islam began as something strange and will go back to being strange. So glad tidings to the strangers."
And at the same time, his response to the surge in anti-Semitic incidents has been hesitant at best. The contrast is striking. A strong, unapologetic message about the preeminence and growth of Islam in the city, and a noticeably softer tone when addressing hostility towards Jews. This is important because while so many activists, commentators, and self-styled revolutionaries remain fixated on Jews and Zionists, a fixation inherited from centuries of religious and ideological conditioning, they are missing the actual structural shift that is happening around them. The groups they obsess over are not the ones undermining their society. The groups they ignore are the ones reshaping it. New York City, which was targeted a quarter of a century ago by jihadist Islam for what it symbolized, is now being reshaped through rhetoric, policy, and demographic strategy. Not through violence, but through the very freedoms the city prides itself on. And the people most vocal about fighting oppression are the ones least willing to acknowledge what is unfolding right before them. Meanwhile, Jewish communities, who long ago integrated into Western culture, contributed to it, thrived within it, they're treated as the problem simply because they stand out or because they succeed. But the forces openly hostile to Western culture, the ones who reject it, reject its values, and seek to replace them, they're the ones gaining ground. We've already seen what this looks like in parts of Western Europe, and the pattern is obvious and repeating. Unless people stop obsessing over the wrong target, the same trajectory awaits the United States. And just to clarify my point, I will take a moment to be less diplomatic. While idiots in the West are obsessing over what they imagine Zionists and the Jews are doing, the Muslim Brotherhood have tapped into the mental illness that scrambles your brain, diverting your attention away from the invasion that has taken place. New York City is now in their hands. A Taqiyya-centered scam is going on, using your freedoms to tear you down, this time without the aircraft. The Jews assimilated their religious identity into your societies, and you assault them because they dress differently or because they excel under your culture. Those who hate your culture are undermining your very existence and destroying you. Western Europe is gone. You in the United States are next if you do not wake up now. And while we are on the topic of Jew hatred, New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft sparked a debate on how we should be responding to the rise in anti-Semitism with the ad that he aired during the Super Bowl this week. The spot, titled "Sticky Note," shows a Jewish student walking the halls of his school and discovers an anti-Semitic note on his backpack. Another student comes up to stand at his side and support him, and then we all live happily ever after. I don't mean to make light of the ad, though many have taken issue with it. The ad serves a purpose with the audience it was aiming for. It was aired during the most viewed TV show in the United States, and it was meant to raise awareness among the American public. Many influencers responded. Tanya Tsikhanovsky of Highly Jewish commended the effort, as we should. Leo Leibovich, a good friend of mine at Tablet magazine, also voiced respect for Kraft personally, but then was very critical, stressing that the Jewish response to anti-Semitism should project power and resilience, not fragility. A wonderful young TikToker who I do not know, named Chana from the Tribe, she gave her rendition of what should have been done with the ad, ending it in a way that Liel would have agreed with, as you can see here. And I saw another rendition in that same direction where it shows that the Jewish kid does the Jewish thing and becomes a doctor and ends up finding a cure for an illness and then heals the anti-Semite from high school, who then expresses remorse, and again, they all live happily ever after. This all sounds nice, but it's disconnected from reality and from the dangers that actually are looming. Hatred of Jews has never stopped at nasty remarks, signs, or demonstrations. Throughout history, it has always escalated into violence and destruction. Even if not on the scale of Nazis, it can still take the form of local acts of destruction. And we need to prepare for that. Not with denial and not with performative dignity, but by ensuring that those who hate us understand that there is a price. That a Jew is not someone you can harm without consequence. There is so much we can do that if anybody here knows Robert Kraft, tell him to give me a call and I'll be happy to show him how his money could be put to good use for the Jewish people. And by the way, to prove my point, I saw this interesting post that was shared around social media claiming that Israel is the most feared country in the Muslim world as per a new survey. And there's a reason that it's true, the past 28 months. Turning to events in Israel now. Prime Minister Netanyahu last week released 55 pages of testimony he gave before the state controller, the official who by law is empowered to investigate failures of the government and its institutions in Israel. And October 7th was undeniably a colossal failure. I'm not going to get into the details or start assigning responsibility. There's still a mountain of information to gather and countless testimonies still ahead. Instead, I want to focus on the core of what Netanyahu was discussing with the security establishment, because that part is not in dispute. Regardless of whether the intelligence community believed Hamas was about to attack, regardless of whether they thought Hamas leaders were serious or bluffing, there was never a debate in Israel about one thing. After Hamas took over Gaza, they were building the infrastructure to strike and destroy Israel. Everyone knew it. The only question was how effective Israel could be in undermining the buildup, and whether Israel could withstand the international pressure that always arrives the moment we take action. And here I can speak from personal experience, having worked inside the government for 30 years. We always knew we had a very short window of opportunity, a few days at most, before the Arab world would turn to international pressure against Israel, backed by media-driven defamation campaigns to stop Israel in its tracks. Everything we witnessed over the past 2 years and a third fits with that exact pattern. One of the reasons Israel agreed to the ceasefire in September was the growing international condemnation. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear where it was heading. To President Trump's credit, he took that European and Western meddling and flipped it on its head. He forced them to put their money where their mouth is, to actually invest in the resolution of the war, to take responsibility for a real solution, instead of issuing empty statements and symbolic UN resolutions that change nothing on the ground. What we see from the testimony is this, that Netanyahu understands that he has to act decisively while the clock is still ticking, and that he understands how to navigate international pressure that will follow. I will end today with the most interesting news, and that which gives the clearest indication as to where Israel is headed, the Israeli economy. This week, the largest exit in history of the State of Israel was officially approved. The European Commission gave unconditional approval for Google's parent company, Alphabet, to acquire the Israeli cybersecurity firm Wiz for $32 billion. To put this in perspective, this is Google's biggest deal ever, and it's for a company founded in 2020 by veterans of the IDF's Elite Cyber Unit, a company that didn't even exist 4 years ago and is now rewriting global cybersecurity standards. Regulators both in the United States and Europe reviewed the deal and found no competition concerns. In fact, the EU's antitrust commissioner even noted that Google is still behind Amazon and Microsoft in cloud infrastructure market share, meaning Wiz isn't about dominance, it's about innovation. And that's the point. While Israel is fighting on multiple fronts, Israeli tech is doing what it's always done: build, scale, and lead. A country of under 10 million people just produced an exit larger than anything Europe has generated in years, and it did so in the middle of a war. Wiz is now operating for the United States, but its DNA is unmistakably Israeli. Speed, risk-taking, elite cyber expertise, and a culture that treats constraints as fuel. And it's the perfect place to take a deeper look at the Israeli economy. The Bank of Israel last week issued its summary of the Israeli economy for the past year, and it declared it to be sound, stable, and actually growing. Despite all we've been through the past few years, from the global pandemic through the most expensive war in Israel's history, the Bank of Israel puts the total cost of last year's war at 350 billion shekels. Israel last year saw 80 billion shekels in foreign investments, more than all of Europe combined. NVIDIA doubled its development centers in Israel. Israel has $231 billion in foreign currency reserves. Israeli commentator Yoram Edry, who I have quoted in previous podcasts, wrote that this is the part the world never understands. Israel is not just an economic miracle, it's a security miracle. There is no rational explanation for how a nation under constant attack, absorbing more missiles than any Western country could ever withstand, emerges stronger each time. Yes, the economy thrives because Israelis work hard, innovate, build, and create. But Western countries work hard too, he explains. They have tech sectors as well. So why does the miracle happen here? That's the question nobody can fully answer, he writes. Edry concludes that this is probably a combination of good leadership and, no doubt, divine supervision. Israeli businessman and commentator Itzik Yush, a friend of mine, offered a sharp analysis this week explaining why the shekel remains so strong despite the war, regional instability, and global economic uncertainty. Yush argues that the answer is simple. Israel is building a future, while much of Europe is managing a decline. He too points to the Bank of Israel projection for 2025, showing that Israeli high-tech is expected to generate around $80 billion in exits, not fundraising, but actual sales of companies and technologies. For a small country fighting on multiple fronts, he notes, Israel's producing more exits than all of Europe combined. According to Yush, this isn't luck. It's the result of two very different strategic choices. Europe chose comfort, regulation, and job security. Israel chose risk, innovation, and Israelis have a hunger, a desire. Europe's deeper problem isn't economic, it's demographic. A society that stops having children, he writes, stops building a future. Without enough young people, there are fewer workers, fewer entrepreneurs, and less growth. He contrasts Western Europe with countries like Poland, which he says still think a generation ahead. In his view, Western Europe is preoccupied with managing decline, while Israel, with a young, competitive global economy, continues to surge forward. Yush concludes with a blunt assessment. Israel isn't catching up with Europe, it's overtaking it. And over time, he says, it will leave Europe behind. And I will leave you with that for today. I'm Daniel Seaman. Thank you for joining me on Straight Up from the JNS TV studios in Jerusalem, Israel. We'll see you again next week.